At the very beginning of the story, we are introduced to a married couple named Thomas and Sarah. They are being hunted by men working for the village chief, forcing them to hide in silence, barely daring to breathe. Sarah's fear grows as she hears horses approaching, followed by heavy knocks that nearly break down the door. In a moment of panic, she can only look at Thomas, silently asking what they should do. Thomas grabs an axe to defend them, but when the men finally break in, he is struck down with the butt of a rifle. He collapses to the ground as Sarah screams in terror. Mortally wounded, Thomas is dragged outside, and with his fading strength, he witnesses his wife being taken and claimed by the village chief. This is the beginning of a valley ruled by fear. Welcome to the Dark Valley. 20 years later, the story shifts to a man named Grider, a photographer traveling through the alpine highlands in search of beautiful landscapes. Along his journey, he comes across a remote village at the foot of the mountains. He arrives with 2 horses, planning to stay for a while and photograph the surrounding nature. However, the moment he enters the village, the locals stare at him with suspicion. No outsider has set foot there in the past 20 years. Before he can go any further, Grider is stopped by 6 men blocking his path. They are the sons of the village chief, Franz, Nicholas, Otto, Jacob, Victor, and Rudolf. Without hesitation, they reject his presence and order him to leave immediately. Grider remains calm, steps down from his horse and tosses a pouch of gold coins toward Franz, hoping it will allow him to stay, at least through the winter. Money does not always solve problems, but this time it softens their attitude. As a condition, Grider is asked to take a photograph of Nicholas. The villagers quickly gather, curious about the camera, an object they have rarely seen. Once the photo is taken and they see the result, their doubts begin to fade. Grider is finally allowed to stay for the winter and is assigned to live in the home of a widow and her daughter, Lucy. Neither of them dares to refuse the decision, fully aware of the consequences of defying the chief's sons. After settling his belongings, Grider heads to the stable and secretly hides a rifle, hoping no one will notice. That evening, he shares a meal with Lucy and her mother. From them, he learns that the 6 armed men he encountered are the sons of Mr. Brenner, the village chief known for his cruelty and absolute control. Later that night, Grider sits alone in his room, staring at a locket containing someone's photograph. His expression reveals a deep, unresolved loss. His thoughts are interrupted by faint noises coming from the stable. When he goes to investigate, he sees Lucy talking quietly with her lover, Lucas. From what he overhears, Grider realizes they are discussing wedding plans that seem almost impossible due to the village's strict rules. Their faces make it clear that their relationship is being suffocated by an oppressive power beyond their control. The next morning, Grider notices Lucy and her mother busy in the kitchen, preparing food while also tending to the horses. He feels uneasy knowing that since his arrival, he has done nothing but eat and rest. Wanting to ease their workload, he offers to chop firewood and help however he can. After the work is done, Lucy invites him to walk into the village center to buy supplies at a shop owned by Mrs. Greta and her husband. Grider goes along and quietly purchases several nails without drawing attention. Their purpose is unclear, but it is obvious they are connected to the real reason he came to this village. Not long after, the atmosphere inside the shop turns tense when Mr. Brenner's sons arrive with their usual arrogance. They pressure Grider to drink with them. When he refuses, Jacob strikes him and forces the alcohol down his throat, causing him to choke more than once. It is clearly not a friendly gesture. After they leave, Lucy looks at Grider with concern and urges him to leave the village before things get worse. Grider says nothing, choosing to keep his emotions buried. Days pass one after another. Grider continues photographing the valleys and mountains, acting as if the threats from the Brenner brothers do not exist. Since the incident at the shop, his demeanor has changed. He grows quieter, colder, and more withdrawn. His attention often lingers on an old cross standing in the middle of the village, as if it holds a meaning only he understands. One afternoon, Grider climbs a nearby hill and notices a pastor standing in front of the church from a distance. The sight makes him pause, as though it stirs memories that were never truly resolved. When he returns home, he finds Lucy and her mother preparing for Lucy's upcoming wedding to Lucas. Innocently, Lucy asks Grider to be the photographer on her wedding day. He agrees right away, grateful for the shelter and kindness they have shown him. The following day, the first snow begins to fall. Grider keeps his promise, photographing Lucy and Lucas during their pre-wedding session as snow blankets the red-orange hill. The moment feels calm, yet Grider's expression suggests his mind is somewhere else entirely. Elsewhere, Mr. Brenner's sons and several young men from the village are cutting trees along the snowy mountain slope. Logs are sent sliding downhill to be collected by horses. At first, everything goes smoothly. After a while, though, the logs stop reaching the bottom. Confused, Franz and his brothers grow uneasy. Otto decides to climb up to check what is wrong, while the others wait below. Soon, the logs begin sliding down again, one by one, and they assume the problem is solved. Then the final log comes rushing down at full speed, dragging Otto's body with it. Silence falls over the group. No one says a word. Otto lies motionless in the snow, his life suddenly and violently cut short. That night, Mr. Brenner's sons carry Otto's lifeless body back to the village. Soon after, the village chief himself arrives and looks at his dead son. He says nothing at all, giving only a brief order for the body to be taken home. Among the gathered villagers, Lucy notices Grider standing at a distance. For a brief moment, a troubling thought crosses her mind, wondering whether Grider might have something to do with Otto's death. A few days after the funeral, Grider finishes developing the pre-wedding photographs of Lucy and Lucas and hands them over to her. At the same time, both families begin preparing for the church wedding. Yet the atmosphere feels heavy, with no sign of joy on anyone's face. Every time Mr. Brenner's name is mentioned, Lucy breaks down in Lucas's arms. She even suggests running away from the village together. But Lucas refuses, unwilling to abandon his elderly parents. All Lucy can do is beg him to find a way to protect their marriage while Lucas remains silent, trapped by the power that controls the village. The next morning, Rudolph, one of Mr. Brenner's sons, goes deer hunting on the snow-covered mountain slope. Just as he is about to take a shot, he hears a branch snap behind him. The deer escapes, leaving Rudolph furious. He quietly moves toward the source of the sound, intending to confront whoever disturbed him.
Come on, sir!
Instead, he is struck when a heavy log slams into his face. Panicked, he tries to flee, but slips and falls from a steep cliff. 3 days pass, and Rudolph does not return. Franz and his remaining brothers grow alarmed and head up the mountain to search the area where he was last seen. At the same time, Grider prepares his horse and takes his rifle with him. Seeing this, Lucy quickly reminds him that village law forbids anyone from carrying weapons except the chief and his sons. At this point, Lucy still does not know the true reason Grider came to the village, which is to avenge the deaths of his parents. Meanwhile, Mr. Brenner's sons finally discover Rudolph's body. Death once again hangs over the ruling family. Mr. Brenner can only stare at his son's stiff body in silence. The scene is witnessed by the villagers and the pastor, who was once the chief's trusted ally. The pastor realizes that Rudolph's death was no accident. The wounds are unnatural, especially when a nail is found driven into his eye. Franz then remembers seeing Grider purchase nails at Mrs. Greta's shop. Suspicion quickly turns into certainty. They rush to Lucy's house to look for Grider, only to find that he is already gone. At that very moment, Grider is high up in the mountains, looking out over the snow-covered valley while carefully planning his next move to complete the revenge he has carried for so many years. The next day, Lucas and Lucy prepare for their wedding at the church. There is no joy on their faces, only fear and fading hope. It is here that the true reason behind the village's fear of marriage is revealed. The village chief has enforced a brutal rule where every bride must be handed over to Mr. Brenner for 1 full week before returning to her husband. This is called a tradition, but everyone knows it is nothing more than cruelty disguised as custom. Because of this rule, marriage in the village is not seen as sacred, but as a punishment. Anyone who dares to refuse is killed without mercy. As the ceremony begins, the pastor leads the prayers in a way that feels deeply unsettling. The words are twisted and misleading, suggesting that surrendering one's body to the ruler is an act of devotion to God. After the ceremony ends, Grider quietly enters the church and approaches the pastor. He claims that he wants to confess his sins. With a calm demeanor, Grider admits that he has killed 2 of Mr. Brenner's sons. The confession leaves the pastor shaken and pale. As fear and curiosity take hold, the truth begins to surface when Grider reveals a photograph of his deceased mother.
Du hast meine Mutter gekannt.
The story then shifts back 20 years earlier to a night filled with violence. Thomas, Grider's father, is murdered by Mr. Brenner and his sons, who were still children at the time, with the pastor's help. Thomas is crucified right in front of his wife, Sarah, Grider's mother. She screams for help, but no one comes. All she can do is watch in agony as her husband is brutally killed. The story continues to the time before Thomas was captured. After their marriage, Sarah is forced to serve Mr. Brenner, condemning her to a life of suffering. Unable to endure this any longer, Thomas takes Sarah and flees, hiding with her in Mrs. Greta's home. At first, Greta helps them by offering her basement as a hiding place. But after accepting a bribe from Mr. Brenner, she betrays them and reveals their location. Thomas is captured, killed, and crucified in front of Sarah as a warning to anyone who dares to resist. That same night, Sarah manages to escape and swears to avenge her husband's death. Enraged, Mr. Brenner burns down Sarah's home along with her parents inside. Thomas's body is left hanging on the cross, abandoned and consumed by crows. After hearing the full confession, the pastor finally realizes that Grider is the son of Thomas and Sarah. A vengeance that has been carried for 20 years reaches its breaking point. Without hesitation, Grider kills the pastor inside the confession room, bringing his life to an end. The story returns to the present during Lucy and Lucas's wedding celebration. Although the event appears festive on the surface, their faces clearly show fear. When Lucy is pulled into a dance by Jacob and then forced to dance one by one with Mr. Brenner's other sons, Lucas finally reaches his limit. He tries to stop them, but is brutally beaten until he can no longer fight back. The tension escalates when Lucy is taken away to be handed over to the ruler. In the middle of a raging snowstorm, the group suddenly comes to a halt as Grider appears in their path. He immediately raises his rifle and orders Lucy to leave. Mr. Brenner's sons are frozen in place, unable to act as Grider keeps his weapon trained on them, even as rage fills their faces. Before leaving, Grider challenges them to meet him the next day in front of the Brenner family ranch, then disappears into the storm. When Lucy returns home, she clings tightly to her mother, finally releasing all the fear she has been holding inside. Grider then escorts her to Lucas's house so they can reunite and begin a new life together. Some villagers object, terrified of retaliation from the Brenner family. They know the Brenners' anger can be deadly. Remaining calm, Grider reassures both families and the villagers. He declares that from this moment on, Mr. Brenner's sons are his responsibility. He promises to end the village's cruel rule and vows to wipe out Mr. Brenner and whatever remains of his bloodline. After that, Grider heads toward Mrs. Greta's house. Upon arriving at her home, Grider throws a pouch of money at Mrs. Greta and forces her to swallow the coins one by one. He makes it clear that she once traded human lives for money, and now she must face the consequences of that betrayal herself.
Soll's fressen! Heiliger Gott, au!
Not long after, Mr. Brenner's sons arm themselves and ride on horseback into the forest where Grider is hiding. Inside a wooden cabin, Grider awakens suddenly, realizing they have arrived sooner than expected. Moments later, a barrage of gunfire tears through the cabin. Believing Grider is dead, Nicholas enters the shack. Instead, Grider emerges from a hidden underground space and shoots Nicholas on the spot. Franz, Victor, and Jacob panic and flee for cover among the trees. Jacob does not make it far, as a bullet strikes him down instantly. Franz and Victor, still hiding, begin to realize the danger they are in. Victor attempts to fight back by raising his rifle, but Grider is faster and shoots him down. Franz desperately tries to drag Victor's body while reloading his weapon, hoping they still have a chance. What they do not realize is that Grider has already changed positions. Shots ring out again from another direction, killing them all. One by one, all 6 of Mr. Brenner's sons fall dead in the snow, marking the end of the brutal power they once held over the village. After that, Grider heads straight to the home of Mr. Brenner, the village chief who has long been the source of so much suffering. When he arrives, the iron furnace is still burning, and he briefly warms his frozen hands. A small child suddenly appears, Mr. Brenner's grandchild, staring at him with an empty expression. The child has no understanding of the sins carried by his family. Without warning, the blacksmith who serves as Mr. Brenner's trusted enforcer attacks Grider from behind. Grider is beaten and stabbed repeatedly until he collapses, blood spilling across the floor. Just as his life is slipping away, Lucas saves him by shooting the blacksmith directly in the chest. Grider slowly pulls himself up and asks Lucas to stand guard outside. He then enters the house alone. He climbs the stairs and walks through room after room filled with women and children, living proof of Mr. Brenner's long reign of cruelty. At the end of the hallway, Grider finally finds the village chief lying weak and helpless in his bed, his body worn down by age. When Mr. Brenner notices the locket around Grider's neck containing Sarah's photograph, his eyes widen in recognition. He realizes that the man standing before him is the son of Sarah and Thomas, the couple he destroyed years ago. Frail and shaken, Mr. Brenner asks about the fate of his sons. Grider gives a simple answer: all of them are dead. That confirmation seals Grider's resolve. Without hesitation, he pulls the trigger. The shot ends Mr. Brenner's life right there in his bed. Grider then takes his mother's locket and stumbles outside to meet Lucas. Back at Lucy's home, he is cared for by Lucy and her mother. For 3 weeks, Grider remains weak and bedridden until his strength slowly returns. When spring finally arrives, he chooses to leave the village. The villagers see him off with deep emotion. To them, Grider is no longer a stranger, but a savior who freed them from a brutal rule. His revenge was not only for his parents, Thomas and Sarah, but for everyone who had spent their lives trapped under oppression. So the moral of the story is do not bully quiet photographers, do not invent evil traditions, and never underestimate someone buying nails in silence.